Okay, super. Great. Well, thank you, Summer, for the introduction. Thank you to the organizers, Joel, Garima, of course, Jessica, and whoever else was involved in organizing. The B Academics is such a special group. Rarely is there, a set of professors and other interested people in teaching about a certain type of business, actively sort of sharing research, sharing teaching ideas. And so it's really great to be here, part of you. With what I'm going to be talking about today, so the title that Summer read off is the title of my book that is going to be published in about a month, called Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. And I'm not going to talk specifically about the book today, but I'm going to talk about how one could teach it. The B Corp phenomena, my background with it is very much as an educator. The first time I heard about B Corps was in 2009 when I was teaching, and in the middle of a class, a student said, we shouldn't be studying CSR of large companies. We should be studying companies that have social missions baked into them, like B corporations. I wrote a couple HBS cases on B Lab, one in 2010, one in 2015, and I've done case studies on 6 other B Corps. And then over the past 2 years, I've been researching the B Corp movement more broadly, interviewed close to 100 B Corps, and I've synthesized all that into a book, which has for a number of audiences. But one of the things, because of my background teaching this, I really want to have it be something that can be useful to help educate our next generation of leaders, of business leaders, of entrepreneurs, about why the work of B Lab and B corporations is so important to the future of US business around the world, and capitalism more generally. So Joel had told me that the formal teaching note that I wrote for the book is in the Google Drive. So you may actually want to pull that up and reference it. I think what I'm going through might make a little more sense if you have the whole document open to you. But as I see, I taught the book this past year, this past spring at Cornell. The book was done, the text of the book was done, and I was able to teach it at a class on social entrepreneurship at Cornell. And as I see the book, there's 4 separate topics that can be taught with it. The first one, which is in some way sort of the sort of theory of the book, is what does it mean to be a corporation in our capitalist system? Also, a set of chapters and content on companies shifting from more of a shareholder orientation to a stakeholder orientation. Ways of managing specific stakeholders, and then, for lack of a better term, sort of the 4th topic, changing the future, which is really about scaling the social innovations of B Lab and smaller B Corps to larger companies, and also driving consumer resonance. Within these different topics and chapters, so the teaching note, if you're looking at it, you can see for each of these topics, what sort of chapters are appropriate for those topics, discussion questions for each topic and chapter, supplementary readings, many by folks that are here today, and then also videos. In today's day and age, if you can have a good video for sort of class or prep, I think that's actually really helps a lot. So I've cataloged a bunch of B Corp related videos that sort of tie to this specific topic. So I'll go through each of these things in more detail, but very briefly, given I have about 20 minutes. So the first general topic, and this I'd say is sort of the most, in some ways, conceptual or theoretical topic in the book and in the teaching of it, is this idea of like what it actually means to be a corporation. And I don't think it surprises any of us on this call necessarily, or this conference, that this idea that corporations exist for their shareholders, aside from being incredibly destructive and just wrong, is a historical aberration. If you look at work in sociology, so some of you might be familiar with William Roy's work on how the sort of the idea of the corporation actually came from a real desire of civic leaders to create civic projects that were bigger than any one entity. And this got transformed over time through a variety of processes, sort of power-oriented processes into the manufacturing sector and other sectors. This organization man, some of you might be familiar with, up until Milton Friedman's famous, declaration in the New York Times that the social responsibility of businesses to increase profits, which really sort of set the mark for the shareholder primacy era. Business was focused on, providing lifelong employment to people, great benefits, pensions. You got a gold watch after working for 20 years. They were upstanding community members. And so I guess in general, this, sort of part of this set of the book is about how, this idea of, corporations is focusing on shareholder maximization is a historical aberration, is really, not what the idea of corporations was set out to be in the first place. As I was working on the book, there was a pretty big shift in actually corporate America to considering stakeholders much more broadly. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Business Roundtable statement on the purpose of the company is not for the shareholders, but for stakeholders. Just recently in 2020, early 2020, the World Economic Forum in Davos was also focused on this topic. Leading investors like Larry Fink have been, saying the same things. And so, even in spite of, sort of the last 5 or 6 months and sort of the COVID pandemic, showing sort of the really systemic problems with our existing economic system, there was some tailwinds that this idea of businesses shifting to a much more stakeholder orientation, were being sounded. So that's sort of in some ways the most sort of abstract set of the book on this idea of what it means to be a corporation. And if you look at the document in the Google Drive, you can sort of see some more details on that. The second topic, I think, will be very familiar to all of you because it really builds on sort of the key sort of change model that B Lab has developed. And it's really very much, I think, conceptually around this idea of shifting from a shareholder primacy system to a stakeholder primacy system. And to think about actually shifting the underlying logics of how business is organized in society, it's much easier said than done. The Business Roundtable, when they came out with their statement of, we want to shift the purpose of the corporation to a stakeholder orientation, I thought I think they felt like they were going to get patted on the back, but really there was a lot of, critique around sort of how are you going to do this? How will you be accountable to the stakeholders? And they really, to my mind, have not come up with any sort of really good, statement or response to this. And so I think that if companies were to look at the B Corp model, I think they would sort of see some solutions to those questions they got. And the reason why is that, we exist in this shareholder primacy system where the institutions and the norms, are really tightly coalesced around that ideology. So corporate law, securities law, how markets are run, these are designed to, maximize shareholder value. Even the norms of business and behavior are around maximizing shareholder value. So, sort of how to break through that. And I think that the two, I think, core innovations in some ways that I see the B Lab movement putting forth are really sort of key to this. So one is, as you're all familiar with, the impact assessment, the B impact assessment, not just used by B corporations, but corporations of all sort of sizes can use this. So not just B corporations, but any company can actually improve its impact through the B impact assessment. And then sort of on the x-axis have stakeholder governance. So this is the B benefit corporation innovation, which now I think is 36 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Italy, Colombia, Ecuador, and Canadian province of British Columbia. So, really, these two innovations I argue, are what is really useful to guide uh, businesses and our economic system to something that is much more focused on stakeholders as opposed to shareholders. The third topic is about managing specific stakeholders, and here are some. In what is the upper left-hand corner is the Ian Martin Group, some employees, really a company that has taken sort of this employee management through B Corp ecosystem, very seriously and been very successful in that. To my mind, I think when I think about the economic and other benefits to a company of becoming a B Corp, I think in the top of my mind is the benefits to the employees and to the culture of the company. Down right below that, Gears, is an example of something where these tools like the B impact assessment have entered the investment markets. So, there's a lot of discussion of impact investing, and not just impact investing, but how all companies can use actually the tools that B Lab has developed to evaluate their portfolio. Many investment managers around the world have been, using these tools for not just impact investments, but all investments. There's a large venture capital private equity company called Fifth Wall out of LA, just certified as a B Corporation. I interviewed some of the leaders there within the last couple of weeks, and they're not an impact investor, but they see so much value in the tools, and in actually being a B Corporation. They actually, end up converting or certifying themselves as an organization. And there's a couple other examples in the book similar to that. There's, as well, on the other side of the screen, there has sort of this local and global element to the B Corp movement. So, one being, these local hotspots like in Colorado and in North Carolina, Vermont, California, some places, Australia, UK, and London. Around the world there are these local clusters which gain a lot from one another. So there's a chapter on B Lab local clusters, and I think when I actually taught the book to my class, one of the most interesting topics we discussed was globalization of the B Lab work. So, as many of you know, B Lab started in the U.S., and I think the founders always thought it was going to be primarily a U.S.-oriented project until some entrepreneurs from Latin America contacted them and said, we want to bring this to Latin America. And then over the past probably, 7 years or so, actually there ends up being more B corporations outside the United States than there are inside the United States. But this really brings up a lot of very interesting issues around, sort of localization of standards, how much needs to be sort of the global standard, how much needs to be local, how to adapt to local environments. So one of the companies I studied was First Respond, which is the first B Corp in China. And things like living wage in China is very difficult to determine. In Shanghai, it's very different than Western China, as an example, as just one example. Not really LEED certified buildings in China. So much of the apparatus of the certification, may not apply to many other places. And so how to actually adapt to that are sort of interesting questions. So this is sort of the third topic. The fourth topic, which is sort of broadly called Shaping the Future, is really about taking the model to scale in a much more significant way. So, on the sort of the furthest left, one item is sort of using the measurement tools, the impact assessment tool broadly. And I mentioned all, impact investors and venture capitalists use it. A lot of companies that are not B corporations use it because, one of the things I found from doing the research and talking to all the companies, that one of the things that is most useful about going through the BIA is that it's just actually good management. Let's not just think about the ESG components, but actually let's think about it as almost a playbook to run a good company. And so, a lot of companies are using it and measuring what matters and becoming more socially and environmentally impactful as well. And then on the furthest right, we have a great sort of recent phenomena of large companies and companies going public as B corporations. So as you know, many multinationals have B Corps as subsidiaries. The most famous and sort of progressive on this is Danone. They have 20 B Corp subsidiaries, including Danone North America, which is the largest B Corp in the world. Some of the others that are listed there. Also, you know, B Lab is coming out with a program to allow large companies, large multinational companies like Danone to get on a path to become more like B corporations. Also, you have many B corporations have started to go public. Laureate Education has been public for a number of years. And just within the last month, actually 2 B corporations have gone public in the US. Lemonade, which is an insurance provider, went public on the New York Stock Exchange, and Vital Farms, just within the last week, went public on NASDAQ. And then finally, in the middle, I have here this idea of responsible production and consumption, which is a UN SDG. And the last part of the book describes about how we can help convince consumers to actually take company sort of values and responsibility into their into their purchase decisions. Because unless we're able to do that, I don't think this movement is going to really scale as much as it can. And as of now, actually, the sort of B Corp label and knowledge of B Corp among general consumers is still rather low. So these items, I think, are very much the future challenges, which I think, at least when I taught it to my students this past spring, found very interesting to think about sort of how to do that. As a final thing, I'll give you sort of an example of like the teaching of content. Again, I hope you're all looking at it and you can see, this is for chapter 3, which is putting the spotlight on interdependencies, which is basically about sort of the development theory and impact of the B impact assessment. You can see there's a listing of chapter objectives, so you can sort of assess how this might fit into your course or not, potentially some questions for the students, a summary of the chapter, various discussion prompts. So things like advantages, disadvantages of frequent revisions to the BIA, and you can see the other ones there. Ways to go further, so I've listed some case studies that relate. So on this chapter here is the 2015 HBS case I did on B Lab. Other articles, which you can see. So I have one of the sort of many articles that Joel and Ka and Matthew Grimes have done. Others of which are also cited. Dan Orkusky, who I think has also talked, has this really great piece. Understanding, measuring impact versus measuring practices, which is something that the BIA has moved towards over the past number of iterations. I think it's in the 6th iteration now. Something about Marco Rubio, which might seem to be a strange person to be talking to the B Corp community, but actually has this really interesting and useful report about how like the stakeholder or shareholder primacy is the root cause of sort of the lack of competitiveness of America. And then also something from Paul Brest on B Lab. So each chapter has other articles that connect to the focus in that chapter, and then also some videos as well. So that's sort of the structure of the teaching note. And please be in touch if there's any both questions you have or other feedback you have. I mean, it's a living document. It's not actually, it's a PDF and it's on my website, but it's not published anywhere. So I can always be sort of updating it, changing it as people give me feedback. So with that, I'll stop. I think I'm just about out of time. The publication date of the book is September 13th, 2020, just in about a month. And that is actually the 50th anniversary to the day of the Milton Friedman article in the New York Times that sort of marked the beginning of the shareholder primacy era. And I hope that, with all the work that all of us are doing and the Business Roundtable and Larry Fink and others, that this next 50 years will be the stakeholder primacy era. And so thank you very much. The book's available on major sites already, so you don't have to wait until the 13th to buy it if you want. And I'll turn it back to you, Joel, and Summer.